Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode on the TMJ podcast. Today we have another special guest. Ghadi Francis is a Lebanese writer, journalist, and war correspondent who has been covering the West Asia region for several years. She is speaking with us today about the latest updates in what is going on in Lebanon. Thank you so much, Ghadi, for being my guest today. I'm very, very excited for this conversation. And just to jump right into it, first things first, you live in Lebanon. You have been a war correspondent and you have been a reporter reporting out of Beirut for several years. Can you tell us the latest developments in terms of what's happening in Lebanon and where everything has been going in the past few days?
Israelis are on a killing spree. Benjamin Netanyahu is on a killing spree in Lebanon to salvage his lost image and his disrupted internal state and his failure in Gaza. He's on a killing spree. He's committing daily massacres against Lebanese civilians, hitting populated villages, actively inducing tens of thousands of Lebanese people to leave their homes under the bombardment, and even while they were leaving their homes, the roads were hit. The Israelis have lost every value or respect to any kind of international law. We have seen this for the past year of genocide in Gaza, and now after they have relentlessly bombed Gaza and achieved nothing and freed no hostages and eradicated no Hamas, they're now trying to salvage their image or their morale by opening that full-blown war with Lebanon. What they don't know is that the resistance in Lebanon was minding these civilians. One of the main reasons why Hezbollah has been orchestrating a very well-planned and systemized kind of solidarity war is because they don't want a full-blown, full-scale war to jeopardize the civilian population. But now that the killing spree is open, I suppose we have already went into that war, and what's happening in Lebanon now will not be ended. Ceasefire talks will end the same way like they're ending in Gaza, with nothing. The only way to save millions of civilians and millions of innocent people from this war criminal is to stop arming him.
And how would you say, especially in the past few days, the Lebanese people have been reacting to all of this? We've been seeing lots of videos come out on social media. And one of the things that has happened is the number of people killed has actually now surpassed the numbers that we saw in 2006. And so how are people taking all of this in?
I think 2006 happened 18 years ago. This is a new generation and this is a new war. It is bigger, it is more brutal, but both parties are still the same. The chaotic and unrealistic expectations of the genocidal rogue regime of the Zionist entity is still the same. And the way and the method and the ideology of Hezbollah is still the same, with differences. In 2006, Hezbollah was less in number, was younger in expertise, and it was of a different context, if we may say. Today, Hezbollah is stronger, their rockets are better and bigger and more brutal, and they have been tried and tested. The difference now is that the Israelis, they are worse in terms of internal stability. The politics, I mean, for the past 4 years, Israel has never been stable.
Right.
How many elections have they done? How many parliaments have they changed? How many governments have they changed? How many internal problems they have? This is before the war and during the war and during the past weeks. How the Israelis were in Tel Aviv and the Israeli conflicts and the military ranks and the security ranks and all their problems. If you look at how the Israelis are dealing with this war, this is the first time in the history of the Zionist entity that you see hundreds of thousands of settlers displaced themselves. And this is existential for them because their whole identity is built on coming and taking land and squatting in it. So their displacement is not like ours. Whereas our people, when they are displaced and killed, yes, you tell me the numbers are higher. But these people have left the South under the occupation 3 times in history, to say the least. They have seen their homes destructed 3 times, and they have built them as well 3 times. So you're
Right.
talking about people tested and tried, and this is their choice. The people of the South, the people of Bekaa, the people of Lebanon, where they are being bombed and martyred and killed, those people chose in voting and in life to be there. And this
Right.
is their choice. They want to fight Israel. Whereas the settlers that came from all around the world to sit in occupied Palestine, they do not want to fight. They do not want to stay and fight for these settlements. They want their safety. And when they go, they will never come back. They left now.
Absolutely.
And Nasrallah said they will not come back. And this is the objective of this war. Any propaganda outside that is not the objective. Yes, they will kill more Lebanese innocent people because nothing's going to stop them. But the question is, can they withhold or withstand 5, 6, 10 months of war where rockets hit every day? I mean, the Hezbollah fighters have been tested and tried, and their community has been tested and tried. And the Lebanese have a history of war and solidarity as well. The community is very strong together, regardless of what we hear outside. The question is, can the Israelis withhold that? Inevitably, they will lose. They will kill us, but in the end, they will lose.
One of the things that we have seen coming out, especially of analysis, is that if Israel were to start a ground invasion, they would be the ones at a disadvantage, a major disadvantage here. And actually, some mainstream outlets are already predicting or saying that, according to some Israeli officials, they may be preparing for a ground invasion. Do you think that is at all plausible at this point?
I think they are lost enough that they don't know what they want. They just want to remain on that killing spree as long as there's nobody in the American administration to stop them. They can bully this the Zionist lobby in the United States can bully politicians around until for further notice. Meanwhile, they try. When the war stops, we have to understand this, Sarah. If the war stops, Netanyahu is done. Netanyahu
Absolutely.
has no other choice. It's his own political career and legacy and ending his life on something. This is why there is no way, and I don't buy any talk of negotiations or ceasefire talks because Netanyahu's head is here to be questioned, and this war criminal has one choice: to keep doing the war, to keep trying to drag the whole world and Iran and everyone to keep the war going on so that he remains in position. This is why the only way this war will end is when he cannot take it anymore and when the Israelis actually take charge or when something changes after months. So the question here is, are the Israelis telling us what Hezbollah is actually doing inside? Do we know actually the casualties and the deaths inside the Israel? They're getting hit hard.
Of
They're getting
course, yeah.
hit
And
hard.
one thing they've been consistently doing is really downplaying it and trying to kind of show this in a way where Israel is the one that has the kind of superiority on the field and denying the fact that there are actually lots of, especially military infrastructure being hit. And that's something that for them it would be to their detriment to come out and admit, but it's the reality of what we're seeing. And speaking about that, actually, a few days prior, which was the pager explosions. I want to talk a little bit about that as well, because that not only killed several Hezbollah members, but it also killed dozens of civilians, doctors in the healthcare, all these different people who would, by Western standards, really not be considered anything but civilians, innocent civilians. Now, Western media headlines, they portrayed this incident as though weaponizing technology is something new for Israel, or as if, the question of does these pager explosions, do they violate international law, as though Israel has not been violating international law every single day in the past, several decades against Palestinians, previously against the Lebanese. So how do you take that as a Lebanese journalist and war correspondent? How would you respond to these?
First of all, I respond by calling it a terror attack. It's not an explosion. It is a terror attack on civilians. Second of all, weaponizing uh, a communication device and pressing the button to kill randomly people wherever they are in the middle of the day, even if they were not civilians, is an act of terror. It's an act of terror by any standards, by all laws.
Absolutely.
And even if you go back to the Geneva Convention and to if they are non-combatants, but they are in the organization, it's wrong to kill them. And the pagers were in the hands of non-combatants at the time. So they were not
Right.
in the battlefield. So in every sense, it's a war crime, anti-terror attack. Children, bystanders, bypassers in the street, in supermarkets, in schools, in hospitals. But if we're really, after a year of a televised massacre, if we're really asking these questions, there's something wrong with us by now. Who are we trying to prove to? I mean, he's already been convicted with breaching international law, not once, not twice, several times. And who stopped him from doing what? You didn't even stop arming him. You didn't even stop funding
Absolutely.
him. You didn't even stop protecting him with your vetoes. He's actually bullying the United States of America into this genocide. This is like the best case scenario I could tell. If I don't want to say that America is complicit and it's the Americans that are slaughtering us and doing these terror attacks, I say at least America is being bullied into that, and the American taxpayers are paying for these bombs and ammunitions and warplanes and I mean, you're paying for it if you're not doing it. So would you please stop? Because what you think is a democracy in the Middle East, it's it's actually making Hitler look mild. They have surpassed what the Nazis did in Europe in terms of numbers and ways. And I would once again quote Remy from ex Remy Kanazi when he says, you could see Israelis live streaming, putting Palestinians in gas chambers, and you would find someone in the US State Department finding excuses and justifications for that and telling you, "Well, wait."
Absolutely. And that's actually interesting you say that because in the past year, a lot of Americans have just woken up to this reality of what's really happening and how their government is, directly funding what Israel is doing in Palestine and in the region. And that's been a wake up call for many because prior to October 7th, many people had no idea what was actually going on. And because of all the videos and all of the firsthand content that was coming out of Palestine and people really seeing a genocide live streamed, many people started waking up to that and questioning now, which is one of the reasons why in the upcoming elections, many Americans are now torn what to do because even those who previously thought that a Democratic candidate could potentially be a better option are realizing that that's absolutely not the case, especially when we see both of these candidates essentially competing to show their allegiance and their loyalty to Israel any chance they get. And this is actually a segue into my next conversation with you. As a reporter who has reported on the West Asia region for so long, how do you view the state of American journalism and the kind of reporting that is viewed as truthful and unbiased? Would you agree with that as someone who has been reporting live from the region itself? How would you say the state of US journalism has been covering these issues in specific?
They've always been the mainstream media in the United States of America and the mainstream media of the world has always been aligning with the foreign policy of the Americans. Whatever they want to start war, even, with the precedents historically, even when the mainstream media was very different from these days, when they had Vietnam War or the war,
Absolutely.
the media was always like drums before, after these foreign policy plans. In Syria, they were lying. In Syria, they were biased. In Palestine, they were always biased. In Iraq, they were lying. They were making fake stories to justify the invasion of a country for oil and for disruption. So I don't think they just woke up and became ethical today. But
Right.
here, I would really like to take the space to salute and thank countless independent journalists in the United States of America and independent outlets. I don't want to forget anyone, but I could start with Breakthrough News, with Abby Martin's work, with the most recent Watermelon Productions, with yourself, your platform, and also like in the UK, you have TRT and other platforms. So there are lots of media, and the social media globalized the the awareness and the enlightenment. And I think we have been able all together as colleagues globally around the world, we have been able to collectively change the fact that the normal average Joe in the West gets the news only through mainstream media. I think this conversation is one of the practices that I'm doing almost daily. Almost daily, I'm speaking to someone in the West using the
Right.
English language and telling them. But in the past, I mean, you can even look at the correspondence that they use. Most of them, they send over with their own agendas. I mean, do you think that that you don't have anybody local who can tell you what's happening? You need to send an American girl to tell you what's happening in Palestine. You think we cannot correspond from here, for example?
Exactly.
And this is not this is just an example to tell you how they're always, this supremacist kind of regard is not new, Sarah, in the region. I mean, it was like
Absolutely.
that since the beginning of the 18th century and 19th century, because I have travel books that are aged that. And when I read how these missionaries used to come to our land and how they write about us, they've always been supremacist, and the colonial vibe of it all is still very persistent. It hasn't changed. They think we are less humans.
Absolutely.
They think our babies are less important. They think that Islamophobic kind of crime is less dangerous inside the United States of America than someone else carrying a flag. So this is bias. This is dehumanization. This is supremacy. This is colonialist idea and vibe. The only hope, the only respite that I have when I look at all the sacrifices and the blood and the hardships that my people are suffering today is that it's not gonna go in vain, because at least people are gaining awareness. There is no way on earth that this will prevail. I'm positive that we will win.
100%. And I think what you're saying speaks really loudly for a lot of younger generation people here. I think sometimes especially if you look at polls and a lot of the stats that are coming out in terms of what percentage of voters are identifying with what kinds of public opinion, what we're seeing is that the younger generation, especially, has been increasingly moving away from the mainstream outlets and exploring a lot more, especially social media and independent outlets, independent journalists that are really coming and showing the realities of what are happening. One of the big ones being yourself, really reporting on what's actually happening in the region and being a voice that is very different from what the mainstream here portrays, and it's directly challenging those mainstream narratives, and people are being offered a perspective that they rarely ever hear or even think about. And that is both a scary thing because it shows the extent to which news and government controlled news especially can impact public opinion. But it's also very, as you said, hopeful because it shows that there is a generation that is starting to look at sources that are on the ground, that are witnessing what is happening and are reporting live from exactly what's, taking place in that region, like yourself. And I kind of wanted to touch on this because one of the captions in your post that I really resonated with, it said, "Journalism that speaks up in times of genocide is the moral compass of the world. Journalism is
Yeah.
not terrorism. Silencing free speech is." And I think that couldn't be more true right now because I think it's so telling of the hypocrisy that we're seeing come out of Western reporting. I wanted to ask you, as a journalist in West Asia, how do you respond to those who say your journalism and your reporting on resistance groups, for example, or on the realities of what's happening in Lebanon and Palestine is essentially feeding into terrorism and what the Western world would categorize as supporting terror groups? What is your general response to that?
Well, I don't see that defending one's country from occupation as per any law is illegal. It's to start by the international laws say that when people are occupied, resistance is a right. The designation of terror groups is also a kind and the way and the paper that the Western hegemony uses on people to force them into certain choices in politics. I think for me here, the real terror in front of my eyes, that is right in front of my eyes today, is the baby killer. The baby killers are the Israeli apartheid occupation of Palestine. So the designation of terror does not come from I don't want to talk about the American people because they don't have a say in this, but the American policy, I mean, they are the identification of terror. Everything that they have done in my region. They killed a million Iraqis, Sarah. If this is not terror, what is terror? You want me to believe your narrative of terror? Why do you terrorize me? Who are you to tell me what terror is? It's you. It's your planes that are killing me. You're gonna make me scared. I mean, what else is there to lose if you're killing me? You want me to, you identify me as a terrorist because I exist in my land. So this is another thing. And number three, denying the facts, don't change them. Denying the fact that thousands, that hundreds of thousands of people, of indigenous native people in this land have this choice and want these groups, these political groups, don't change it. In Lebanon in particular, I mean, because I am in Lebanon and I report about Hezbollah in times like these. In
Right.
Lebanon, Hezbollah is the biggest bloc in the parliament. I mean, as a journalist, you know Hezbollah MPs, you know Hezbollah press officers because they are
Right.
in the life and they are in the community and they are around one third of our community because they are an idea and an ideology. It's not all combatants. This is why it's very, very dangerous when we say Hezbollah Israeli war or Hamas Israeli war. Their war is not with Hezbollah, their war is with the people. Their war is with
Right.
me and with my. I'm Christian. They can kill me just because I don't submit or concede to their hegemony, regardless of what my religion is or what I have done in my life. And then I mean, the Israelis killed an American Palestinian journalist, Shirin Abu Akleh. The Americans say any word about that. They investigated. And then after the investigation told them it's a sniper that shot her down intentionally
Right.
and killed her, what did they do? Why isn't all your mainstream media talking about Shirin Abu Akleh the same way they talk about Mahsa Amini, whom I don't know her face or her story or her identity or her career? Shireen Abu Akleh is a voice that was there in the collective memory of the indigenous people for years. She's a reporter. She was
Absolutely.
reporting. She got killed.
Mhm.
Nobody even regarded her right and dignity. Her life is not equal to not 1%, one third, 10,000 of another girl called Mahsa Amin in Iran. It's your policy. It's your, I mean, it's a lot of bluffing at that point. And when you are being massacred, Sarah, you don't want to prove anything to anyone. To anyone who thinks I'm supporting terrorist groups by reporting on the resistance, I would ask them, what would they do if they were me? They would pray for the safety of the planes that killed them or the rockets that defend them from the planes. It is unrealistic to expect any Lebanese person, any Palestinian person, any indigenous person to hate the people that protect their children and to love and prefer the people that send them ammunitions and war planes. Our identification of terror in the Middle East and in West Asia, Sarah, is the American foreign policy. This is
Right.
what terrorism is.
And it's really interesting because one of the most common ways, actually, that media here tends to completely shut down conversations and essentially nullify any argument to the contrary is by using these exact words like terrorism or terror groups. And essentially, when people read that, the first thing they think of is okay, if, America has designated a certain group as terrorist, then there's no conversation even to be had. And that actually speaks a lot to the ignorance of people here because it's never the question of where is this coming from or have we even taken the time to look at the realities of what's happening and why these groups are designated as terrorists. And we actually have a long history of many groups in American history itself being labeled as terrorists, and then decades later they're celebrated as people who championed human rights
Yes.
and peace. And so it's really an internal hypocrisy that people rarely question. But how does that viewpoint differ in Lebanon or in Palestine or other countries that are on the receiving end of actual US terrorism in the region? How are they defining resistance? And how do you think that differs from that kind of Western view that is always viewed as superior?
I think the only reason that drove the people of this land to become that strong in deterring and resisting, the only people that made the Iranians become one of the best weapon manufacturing nations today under sanctions. The only reason why the Lebanese people now have formed a population resistance that is 100,000 fighters with ballistic missiles, the only reason is that, is the supremacy. Because you cannot keep on oppressing people and expect them to submit, not if they don't think you're better than them. They don't know anything about our culture. They came as colonizers, and most of the time they came to a land full of culture. It's thousands years old cities and culture and people and resistance and resilience. But speaking to a very important point that you said about the sanctions and designating as terrorists, two words: Nelson Mandela.
Exactly.
I mean, up until the last 30 minutes, the last half hour before he broke the apartheid system, he was in prison. They already, like, they convicted him as an international pariah. And they had sanctions,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
He was
He
a
was on the
terrorist for
terror
them.
list.
And then he became the icon. And I promise you, Sarah, we will live and we will see how these people who are designating us and our resistance as terrorists will change their minds. Because you can only hide for a period of time. You cannot lie and believe your lies forever. You cannot keep on manufacturing lies and believe it forever. And there's one thing about, this point is very important. You said about, like, when someone is designated as a terrorist group, we just take it without thinking as
Absolutely.
Americans. This is what you
100%.
said. I quote you. And I think there's the culture of fast food and the culture of fast stances as well. Some
Right.
people don't want to bother and think and make up their own minds about information. They like to take it fast food, you know? Okay, so you would think on my behalf. So everything that's outside America, I believe my State Department, And everything that's inside America, I believe the Democrats or the Republicans or whoever they believe or my church. I mean, what's Lebanon to a normal American citizen if it's not in the news and the headline manufactured by the mainstream media? It's such a small country on the other side of the world. Why would they learn about it unless they have a friend, or they've tried the Lebanese cuisine, But I
Exactly.
mean, an average American has to really search and work hard to get to the bottom of the good information or the true information. But today, thanks to all this blood and sacrifice, the awareness is growing.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think is also worth mentioning, you were talking about how why would anyone really bother delve into, let's say, Lebanon or Palestine or Iran or Syria. A lot of it, again, it's really scary because it's very, very institutionalized within the Western system, whether it's within our music industry or our movies and, Hollywood, just the ways that West Asia or just the Eastern world is depicted almost sends the message that they are irrelevant, and the only time where we should really be referencing them is when they are catering to our definitions of playing into that terrorism role, or being in that inferior status where we are the ones who have to go there with our troops and our soldiers and bring them democracy and bring their women freedom. And so when you have this stuff so deeply ingrained within a culture that subconsciously even is viewing people who live on that side of the world as subhuman, it becomes that much easier for them to accept the fact that their lives are probably not as valuable as those who live here. We see it within our educational institutions, we see it within the job environment, the professional environment, all the way up to the government. And I think what you're saying really speaks to this, much more deeply rooted problem of how is a given society controlling the way people are thinking. And that's the reason why I really wanted to focus with you a lot on the reporting that's coming out of here versus reporters like yourself who are, talking about all these issues coming out from there, because you're presenting two very different worldviews. And as much as they are different, I think a lot of people here are waking up to the fact that maybe the Western worldview and paradigm on the world is not at all as supreme as we think, because here are people who are showing these realities we never thought were even possible. So as, a war correspondent who has been, reporting on these issues for so many years, how do you see the future of all of this unfolding? Do you think that people are really waking up to these realities, or do you think that Western reporting is going to continue having a chokehold on people's ideologies and the lens through which they're viewing the world?
I think the truth will prevail and we are closer. And they cannot succeed in terrorizing everyone all the time. It's just, the point, the peak has been reached. And I really count on the awareness, and I really count on the youth, and I really count on the fact that this struggle did not change, and the people here did not change their minds, and the realities are now all out there. The future for this cause is an inevitable win, because for 77 years we did not forget, we did not change our mind, we became even more perseverant, more concentrated about that, and the atrocities have just become global. In the beginning, in 1948, when they confiscated our homes and lands and killed our people and mass raped them, nobody took footage of that, and they were selling themselves as the victim of one Holocaust and actually carrying on another, but nobody cared. Today, we're showing everyone, and the Jews of the world are speaking and saying, not in my name, most of the time, the intellectuals even. So now the narrative, I know Hollywood is a big part of it. The whole like making the scene is a big part of it. There are billions of dollars here for that. But even billions of dollars and even very big states and even powerful armies do end at a certain point. And I think we are reaching that end sooner rather than later.
And one thing that I think is worth mentioning as well, especially with the recent, few days in Lebanon, is we've seen historically, and especially in the past year, how the Lebanese people have had this unwavering support for Palestine, for Gaza and for Palestinian liberation. And this is the case even if it means they have to, sacrifice themselves and their families and face the consequences of doing that. Where would you say this strong commitment of the Lebanese people stems from? After all, a lot of them are paying with their lives. They're going through immense difficulty. Where do you think this commitment stems from?
This is engraved in our genes and our ancestral fights, Sarah. While you were saying this question, I was thinking, is it the religion only? No. Is it only about Palestine? No, I mean, and since the dawn of history, we have this mythologies about queen warriors and princess warriors of Zenobia and Isar, the brightness of our queens and princes in our Phoenician mythologies and our religion as well, the wanting to fight the evil, the wanting to actually sacrifice your life for your land, for the bigger cause, for your. This is something engraved in the way of life, and I'm so proud to be a Lebanese person. We are a melting pot of culture. We are the legacy of my land is inventing law in Iraq. It's inventing religion in Palestine. It's inventing manufacturing arts and the first cities, the first inhabited civilized cities in the world were in Iraq and Lebanon and Syria. This is where we come from.
Right.
So our want and perseverance to defend our homeland comes from the greatness of our homeland and our people. But also, this steadfastness that you see in the Lebanese pro-resistance ranks mostly, a lot of blood has been shed in this land. A lot of sacrifice has been put. And because it is tangible, the wins are tangible. People lost their homes, but people were able to come back. They witnessed and they contributed in rebuilding their homes. Not once, but twice. You
Right.
cannot erase this memory. So they know that if they fight with merit and with deserving and with faith, they will liberate their land, they will liberate their prisoners, and they will rebuild it, and they will rebuild their lives over there. They have done it before. This is why they don't change their mind. We are proudly as Lebanese in 2006, and I am from that generation. I was 17 years old in 2006. We
Right.
are the only people in this region that have shown you what Israelis look like when defeated. We are the first people that defeated the Israelis in the history of this struggle. Ever
Right.
since Israel took Palestine, nobody defeated it. The first defeat was in 2006. And inshallah, The second big defeat will be in 2024.
As many people, especially here, associate the Lebanese resistance to a very small faction of Shia Muslim. But what we're seeing, according to what you're saying, and a lot of what is coming out from in the region itself, it's not just Shia Muslims. It's not even just Muslims. So many people, Christians, non-Muslims, are behind this. Can you speak a little bit to that as well?
I think that has nothing to do with religion at that point, because many of the Muslims in the region are complicit with Israel, and they're dealing with them as Israel slaughters other Muslims. So it's not about the religion here, it's more about your actual practicing what you preach. And our struggle is with the colonization. It's not a struggle for the sky, it's a struggle for the land. In Lebanon, I can speak about Lebanon and Palestine. I could like now remember randomly the Bishop of Baalbek. I mean, he's a resistance fighter in his own terms, because he's spreading the solidarity and the steadfastness of his Christian community in Baalbek. So why is the Christian community in Baalbek pro-resistance? Because they have been oppressed and occupied, and they have been killed and brutalized by the Israelis. So the resistance is the reaction. The action is the occupation. Wherever there's occupation, there is resistance. Occupation does not regard religion when they bomb churches, when they rape. Now, I mean, Layan is a Christian prisoner in the Israeli prisons. She's a student. She's a college student. What did she do? No conviction. No, there's nothing. Just arrest without any crime for months now. If you don't see through these things, you just have to ask yourself: didn't this mainstream media lie to me about a group of people before? And I want to ask you one thing. I mean, if it's only a matter of religion here, why are the Jews of the world standing and saying not in my name? And these narratives have been long used, and they don't work anymore, Sarah. Trust me.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work. Shia Muslims, Sunnah Muslims, atheists, whatever your religion is, do you understand that these people came from Europe and the West and took our homes and lands right in front of your eyes with your empowerment? Do you understand what that means? Do you understand that this is textbook colonization, and that our right is to fight? Once you get that, you try to be empathetic, not apathetic. You try to put yourself in our shoes. You know that it's not about the religion. The religion maybe strengthens people. The ideology makes them disregard the sacrifice in a way because of the strong faith. But it doesn't give you the political stance here. The political stance comes from the political events. And had there not been an occupation, Shia Muslims of Lebanon would prefer to do something else, not always fight, but because we're occupied, Shia, the Sunnah, the Druze, the Christians, the non-religious, everybody is fighting the oppressor at that point.
I know there are people who are already talking about talks of a ceasefire and coming to a truce and all of that, but we already know that ceasefire essentially means nothing if there isn't any effort made to stop the Israeli regime and everything that it's doing, because they will continue. You've been reporting on this region, obviously, for a very long time now. How would you say you foresee all of this unfolding within the next few months?
I don't think, like we previously mentioned, Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have the other option. If there's no war, there's no Netanyahu. And I think as long as the American shenanigans of a ceasefire are there, without actually seizing the arming and the funding, it's nothing. So what's going to actually change the events is the deterrence and the actual battlefield. Cannot really expect what will happen, but I trust very well that the Israelis cannot withstand what the Lebanese can or what the Palestinians can. And I know very well that the amount of missiles and weapons that the Axis of Resistance has is enough to open fire for months and months. So what's going to happen now is that once the Israelis understand that the loss is inevitable, they will take it and they will go back. And then maybe things will change. In Lebanon, Sayyid Nasrallah was very clear. When there's a ceasefire in Gaza, he will stop that war. And I think he will not stop before that. And he was
Right.
also clear in saying there is not one Israeli settler that will go back to the north. So they won't. And I think in the coming days, the events and the battlefield will be a better testimony of the events. Like you have to go, the Israelis don't say their losses. You have to try and look harder at what they're actually suffering from and take into consideration that they cannot rebuild their settlements. Once they go, they're never coming back.
One final question in terms of the Lebanese people and the number of casualties and the ongoing Israeli bombardment. How much worse do you think it's going to get before we see any hope for all of this ending?
I expect the worst. I expect the worst because they are criminals and cowards. They cannot get to the resistance fighters that are actually firing the rockets. They look maybe at the intel information that they have. They kill leaders in Tehran. They kill leaders in the middle of the day in bustling streets in Beirut. They kill leaders
Right.
that are above 65 years of age that are not in the battlefield. They will try this. They will continue with that. They will keep on assassinating people and keep on bombing what they call objectives and brutalizing and terrorizing the civilian population of Lebanon, which is all. We are all like uh, under that war. They will continue to do that, and because nobody's gonna stop them, and then under the rockets of the resistance, they will be deterred. This is what's gonna happen.
Well, thank you so much, Ghadi, for your time and for giving us live updates of what's happening in Lebanon. We're praying for the people of Lebanon and Palestine, and we hope that the future holds the best for all of us.
Thank you.